Okay, I'll call the emergency city council meeting of April 4th, 2020 to order
It's
at
the
noon.
third.
It is the third.
Oh,
Wow.
don't scare me.
Okay, of April 3rd, 2020 to order at noon. Roll call, please.
Mayor Copeland,
Here.
Tom Baylor,
Here.
Kathy Sherman,
Here.
Jeff Guard, Melina Meyer,
Here.
Ann Schaefer,
Here.
David Allison, no, I guess absent, and David Gleason.
Here.
That's a quorum of council.
Okay, thank you. Consider approval, motion for approval of the agenda.
Move to
Move to
approve.
approve the agenda.
Okay.
Second.
Got a motion from Vice Mayor Meyer and second. And so if there's no objections, the agenda will stand approved as submitted. Okay, hearing none. Does council have any conflicts of interest to disclose? I can't imagine, given the subject matter. Hearing none, we'll have communications by and petitions from visitors. So before we take audience comments there, I just want to preface this emergency meeting with an explanation of why it's an emergency meeting and why we gave shorter notice than normal. So as the public and council's aware, we are under an emergency order for the COVID-19 crisis, and this is a COVID-19 corona virus item. So a couple of elements. One, council asks that they please be advised of any emergency expenditures. Given the magnitude of this decision, we felt it was most appropriate to call a meeting of council because of the fiscal note, and also comply with the council's directive to notify you if we were considering any potential expenditures. The nature of how and when we receive the information and the change in posture to that information is what brought this to the table this morning. And then as we are considering the purchase of a testing protocol that has been accepted by the FDA but not approved, and is available from a U.S. subsidiary of a manufacturer, in which they would require prepayment for purchase of the testing kits, and the high demand levels and the backlog of orders that's developing, and the time-sensitive nature of receiving these test kits if council decides to move forward with them. A decision early in the day gives us time to execute the financial transactions and purchases to get the order placed today rather than Monday or Tuesday, which puts us earlier in the order stack and gives us a better opportunity to meet the published timelines. So that is the time critical nature of an emergency response tool that's been vetted through our emergency management incident management team and our medical director and staff. So I just wanted to emphasize that this is an emergency meeting with shorter than preferred and shorter than normal communications guidelines to the public. And with that said, we do have a public call-in line available at 253-6202. And that line is available for the public to call in and provide communications by and petitions from visitors. So are there any audience comments or any public participation regarding this agenda item at this time? I would just emphasize that there's an opportunity for audience participation at the end of the meeting, and there will be a lot of information disclosed and discussed by council, and I would suggest that audience participation after they hear the information would be more efficient and appropriate. Okay, so hearing no audience participation at this time, I'll just give council an overview, and I understand this is limited information that's time sensitive and of a large magnitude, and that's what emergencies look like. It's what your incident management team has been trained to manage and is managing on a day-to-day basis, as well as your city manager, and to a lesser extent myself, as we work with incomplete information that's constantly developing and becoming accessible and making decisions based on the best available knowledge and in consultation with each other on the emergency management team, and more importantly with our medical professionals and staff. And this is one of those situations. So despite being contacted 4 or 5 days ago with an opportunity to participate in antibody testing through a direct purchasing opportunity, which reduces the cost and improves the time frames for delivery, there's a lot of question marks in the medical profession and in our partners at the state and federal level as to the efficacy and usefulness of these tests. And initial indications were that this was not a good option for Cordova. And I would say at this time it is a limited option. We want to be very clear that this is not a diagnostic test that tells if you currently have the virus and are shedding. It is and I would also point out, however, that the antigen tests that do indicate that are have limited accuracy as well. So any and all the tests that are available still require precautionary quarantine type, self-isolation type, hygienic type activities because there are false positives and false negatives to some extent. An antibody test just simply measures your body's response to the virus and to this particular virus. And you have 2 groups of antibodies in your body, the immunoglobulin M type, which the body responds within a few days of being infected with the virus, and those start to show themselves. And then later, the immunoglobulin G type, or the IgG type, antibodies start expressing themselves. Those are kind of the foot soldiers that come along behind and also kill the virus, and those are the ones that stay in your system for many, many years, perhaps your lifetime. So the way this works is you have a small, inexpensive $5 kit. You draw a sanitary blood sample. You add that blood sample to a well in a little test strip. Think of it as somewhat like a pregnancy test type thing. It administers right on the site, indicates right there in hand within 10 to 15 minutes. You add a reagent to the blood well, and it soaks up into a visible sight glass that has 3 indications. One, a C indication tells you that it was a valid test. The baseline indicates, and then it indicates either none or one or the other or both of the antibodies presence in your body. So there's 3 basic outcomes. You've been infected with the virus, but your body hasn't started to generate antibodies yet, so the test shows that you don't have any antibodies. And this is if the test works perfectly, and again, there's a small percentage that don't work right. So it shows that there's no antibodies. It doesn't mean that you're not infected, and you can't treat it as if, okay, wow, clean bill of health, I'm fine. The next thing is that you show an IgM indication that shows that sometime in the last few days you've been infected and your body's starting to generate antibodies. That means that yes, especially in the absence of the G-type antibodies, you've been infected, your body's fighting it, even if you don't have symptoms. You should probably, you definitely need to have heightened diagnostics around that, whether that's following with a antigen test or a mandatory quarantining. There are several places that the medical profession, the city could mandate that you go after you take one of those tests. If you see the G-type antibodies and only the G-type, that means you've probably got the virus. You didn't even become symptomatic. You recovered fully, and you are now essentially immune for a few months. You're probably not gonna catch it again, and you probably can't spread it. So that would be a good outcome. And in places where these have been broadly applied, like Iceland, they're finding that half the people that register on this test, register antibodies, had the virus, recovered from it, never even knew they had it. And that's about half of the people that take the test. And that includes the mostly the younger population. So that's kind of an overview of the test, and I'll take a breath there and see if there's any questions about the technology itself from council, or any questions about the preamble or why this is an emergency meeting.
I've got a couple, Clay.
Councilman Guard.
Yeah, what's the name of the company that's doing these kits? The manufacturer.
So, and it's Hanju Biotech Company Limited. So that's Biotest is the name of the company that's registered with the FDA. So on the email that we sent out, there's a copy of the FDA registration of this company. They do have a U.S. subsidiary that is, let me get the name for you here. It's called Avin Bio, and they sell to, or Advin Biotech, and Advin Biotech they're basically a wholesaler. So they are selling to Providia, for example, the company that the state purchased their kits from. So Advin supplied those, but they're selling them through a wholesaler to the state of Alaska. That's the company.
Okay. But Hangzhou, how do you spell that?
It's ANGZHOU. And you should have an email in your council emails that includes a attachment page, and it's a pro forma invoice on there, which is basically their order form. And that's the reason they're requiring lots of 50,000, because they are direct selling. They originally were approached to sell a couple million units to the state of Alaska, and the state didn't initially want to buy any. And so they said, well, if individual communities or regions want to purchase, we'll do lots as small as 50,000 in direct order and direct sell them. And that's one of the options that council has in front of you.
Okay. I have to apologize. I didn't get the email.
Okay, we can get that information out to you, but it's HANGZHOU, Biotech Limited, and that's the name of the Chinese company. And then Advin, ADVIN, Biotech is their U.S. subsidiary in San Diego.
Okay. Okay, I've got that. And I haven't got clear, I've been reading a bunch on this since yesterday. How long do they figure you're contagious before you start producing the first antigens there?
The latest information I've seen in the in the media and through our medical staff is 1 to 7 days. So generally, you start to present within 7 days. Is kind of the outside.
Okay, so you become contagious within a week, and I saw conflicting information on how fast you start producing the antibodies.
I'm sorry. You may be. I'm not sure when you become contagious. I think 1 to 7 days is the time it takes for the antibodies to start showing up in your system.
Okay.
You can be shedding before then, though.
Yes, I understand. I just didn't. I was trying to get an idea because I saw some.
What happened?
Okay, I think we may have we got dropped, council. Do we have anybody on?
He still started again.
Okay, we'll start it back up. Helen,
I was just going to ask, I mean, because I think part of the thing is, I know there's all this information, but one of the things that I'm aware of is like England was going to massively test.
Yeah.
And then just yesterday they said, you know what, there's so many tests out there and their accuracy is not high enough to produce the results that we need to make sure that we're not giving false positives or false negatives or whatever. So I'm just curious as whether you've been able to do any.
yeah, I read the labels on there, and so there's two elements of the test. There's a sensitivity and there's a selectivity, and they compete with each other. So if it's really super sensitive,
You might as well wait for this.
it'll give you a positive every single time. The problem is some of those positives might be from MERS or from a different strain of SARS.
Yeah, so
or
that,
something else.
that's what Britain was.
So Councilman Guard, you were, I think, mid-question there when we dropped.
I kind of dropped out of where I was. But basically, I'd been looking into this as best I could yesterday evening and this morning for a while, and
Maybe I can help with your thought path.
I was just trying to get some more information because
Yeah.
a bunch of the stuff I was finding were vastly different answers. So
Well-
I appreciate your answers, and I will sit back and quietly wait for more information from you here.
Okay, so I've just given a basic overview of why calling an emergency meeting and why now, and also of just the basic function of the test. So I think now to look at the commercial aspects a little bit and some options. I want to be clear that even though it's an emergency meeting and there's a potentially large fiscal note, that there are several options here for council, and the decision doesn't have to be made today. I just want to try to lay out what the potential implications are because I have somewhat imperfect information as well. And I did have a chance to get a follow-up email to admin and get some additional questions that Helen and I had answered. And let me see, I'm just pulling those up. So essentially, here's the framing. It is a direct, a wholesale purchase from Advin, who requires us to wire money so that they can place the order and get us in the queue with the Chinese manufacturer. So they're the U.S. subsidiary that calls the factory and says, okay, we just got an order, go ahead and make them. And we've got the cash in hand. Part of the reason they're requiring that cash in hand, of course, is that there is huge demand right now. So there's an upsides and downsides to demand that I've experienced in my career in other venues. When there's a really high demand, it means that they're not going to get real ruffled if they're going to be more likely to allow cancellation of your order if you like. And so that's one of the questions Helen and I asked, can we cancel our order later? If we jump through hoops and place it right now, is there a chance to back out? And so their answer was maybe. So, and that's their answer. So we say, what's the current estimated delivery time? And the estimated delivery time is 2 to 3 weeks, and they're fairly firm. So one of Helen's question, can you guarantee that, or what's the outside that will get it? And they're saying they're in massive millions of unit production, and they're air freighted directly over from China. So he doesn't have a guarantee in front of us right now, but they're very confident in a 2 to 3 week delivery for an order placed today. And then we asked for references in the U.S. to have used these test kits or purchased them and ordered them. They did give us some references. I haven't followed up with those references. But again, the state of Alaska has purchased ultimately through this vendor. they're taking orders from all over the country. And this is a test that's been on the market for quite some time and used overseas in other countries. So it looks like a 50,000 unit minimum order, $4.75 for the kits. And the kits are almost identical to the individual testing units, except that kits come with 25 tests and they have one bottle of reagent instead of being individually packaged with each individual unit having its own little tiny 2-drop reagent bottle. So there's about a 30 cents a unit difference. So in round numbers, shipping and wire transfer fees and so forth, figure $5 per unit times 50,000 units is about $250,000. That's one option, is for the city to enter that purchase. The potential downsides are that we don't get them in time, or that we get the test and something else has become available in the next 2 or 3 weeks, or that we get the test and they don't perform as we had hoped, or more likely that we get the test, we can't use all of them ourselves, and maybe we can't find a home for the rest, and so we don't end up using all of them. So those are potential downsides. Other possible scenarios, I don't know how likely because I haven't done a lot. I've done some footwork, but not a lot. We've reached out to the state. The state may pay for these. They may help us pay for them. We do have CARES Act money coming to the city that has to be used for COVID-19 response. So there's the hospital. However, the hospital is going to have other needs. The medical director says she supports these tests. It gives her another tool, but she wouldn't use hospital resources to do this. There's other places where they know they're going to need those resources. I've reached out to NVE. They may be willing to participate in the purchase or the administration or both. And they also have tribal funds coming. We can also work with Alaska Municipal League to shop around with other communities to see if they are willing to purchase, and or we could have any number of arrangements with the state to buy any that we don't use, to give us some on the front end, and then we return them when ours come in, or vice versa if we get ours quicker. But that's kind of the $250,000 option that you could either exercise now or later. Another option for council would be to say, well, wait a second, the state has, if I understand right, 50,000 units that they've ordered. I've already asked them, and we could go down that path to try to get a certain number of units from them, whether it's 2,500 or 5,000 units, and get those dispatched. I think there's a fairly good argument for us being an early fishery and getting access to those. So that would be another option. Downsides are just chain of custody and whether or not the state would give those to us. I would tell you, to date, the state has been communicative with us, but they have made it clear that they're prioritizing communities that already have cases, and that's consuming most of their resources. So that's just the reality. And so I would just leave that out there. The other opportunity, of course, would be to have the processors participate in the cost, or to have individuals who receive the test participate in cost. So those are kind of a whole suite of options, and this might be a good point to pause again for council questions, comments, so forth.
Yeah, I have a question. This is Ann.
Councilman Schaefer.
So in terms of like the number that would be needed or wanted, you know, the 50,000 versus if we just bought some from the state or were able to get some from the state share, I guess it sort of depends on the anticipated use of the test. You know, is this something where you're going to get, we'll do testing of a lot of people in the population, or as people come in, and then we'll do follow-up tests throughout the season because you might get exposed to it later after you've already had the test. So are we going to want to have multiple tests available basically per person in the community? Or, I just am wondering what the anticipated use
Yes.
is. If this is going to be like a continued monitoring effort, or if it's like a one and done.
No, that's a very good question, and it's kind of pertinent to the volume actually. And I'll just lay out a scenario. Not being a medical professional myself, having seen how some of these have been used and in a potential or likely use, you you test somebody, and you have a C indication, so the test tells you yes, it was a valid test, but there's no antibodies showing. All you know at that point is that there's no antibodies showing. They could have been infected potentially for up to 6 or 7 days at that point. They may already be infectious, and that's what council and the community needs to understand. However, for someone entering Cordova that's under quarantine, if they take a test the first day off the plane or ferry and take another test at 7 days, now you say, wow, we had no indication, then we had a positive indication. This thing is on the upswing, so a couple of things. They're probably infected, they're probably infectious, and we should probably administer our other test and see if we get a positive indication for virus. And precautionary measure would dictate quarantining for sure. Then maybe they take a test 4 weeks later. They have the M type is no longer in their system. The G type is in their system. They're probably, with a fairly high degree of certainty, especially given the other tests, immune and not contagious. And maybe that you've just started to build some of the herd immunity in your community. So that's one scenario. And given the cost, the intention would be to broadly test the community, broadly test those entering, and test periodically. This would yield a piece of information to the community as to what our previous exposure and total overall immunity might look like. It would also give the state information, and most importantly, it would help with tracking. If we know that someone comes in, if this test helps us identify someone who is infectious, then we can look at where have they been outside the community, where have they been inside the community, and it can help with the overall management and characterization of so.
Yeah, thank you. And do we have enough healthcare personnel in town to do that kind of mass testing?
Another good question. So the FDA, and I'll make this clear, the FDA has said we have not approved this test. However, we will allow its use if it's administered by a professional a medical professional. That would be nurse level, PA level, physician level. And we do have a fairly large pool to draw from there between the public health nurse, NBE, and the CCMC staff. And potentially requesting state medical staff to come in. That would most likely be the public health nurse, but that's one thing. The other thing the FDA requires is that you have to disclose to the individual that it is not a diagnostic test, that it is not FDA approved. And so that's just part of the protocol that we would have to execute. I think that answers your question. So the answer
Great,
is,
thank you.
the answer could look like this: a medical professional has to don their PPE, a face mask, a mask, a face shield, and gloves, and apron, and because again, they're going to treat every administered test as if it's an infectious case, and if there's 10 people standing there, these are 10 kits that can be numbered, administered, and you wait 10 to 15 minutes for the indication right there on the spot. You could schedule families or individuals throughout the course of a day or so forth in an area where you can't spread or create more proximity and so forth. So my short answer is yes, and the preliminary indications, at least from our medical director, is she would like to have this tool and would use it.
Oh, thank you.
Clay, I got one other question.
Councilman Garden.
We do a blood draw for this test. is this done in the regular vacuum vial stuff that you do regular blood draws at the hospital with?
No, this is
Are those supplies we'd have to have in addition to these, or
good. All
PPE the only extra stuff we'd have to have?
okay. All good questions. So, I will circulate. I'm not sure that I did already. I'll circulate a couple of videos on the overall, the bulk test kit and the individual test kits, but they come with everything you need. They're dated. You open the sanitary wrapper. There's a small lancet, a sterile lancet inside. There's an alcohol wipe. And so the protocol looks like this. You wash and dry your hands. You open the alcohol wipe. You wipe your finger. You rub on your finger for 15 or 20 seconds to get the blood flowing. Then you squeeze from your wrist up towards your palm. The first little bit of blood that comes out, you wipe off with the, sanitary, of course, and then you squeeze out the more blood with the wrist rub. And then when that drop of blood is there, you have a sanitary capillary tube that comes with the kit that draws up the blood to a fill line so you know that you have the minimum you need. You set that into the blood well, which draws it in. All of that material then, of course, has to be treated as biohazard by the medical professional and disposed of properly. But once it's in the kit, you have 10 to 15 minutes. The reagent is also there. You open that, you drop 2 drops into the reagent well. That soaks up into the view screen, mixing with the blood as it goes. And then in 10 to 15 minutes, you get your indication. So everything is there and prepackaged. It just has to be disposed of as per standard medical protocols.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to mention, oh, go ahead, and I'll just, is that Councilman Baylor? I just want to mention before we take your question that your incident commander, Paul Tremblay, has come in. I did want to mention to council, he's recommending that council do this, that we purchase the lot. I'm also going to recommend that you purchase the lot. Dr. Sanders, I'm not going to put words in her mouth and say she recommends it. I'm going to say that she feels that it is a tool that she would use. She would not use hospital resources to do this because she has other priorities that we are treating as priorities in terms of our planning and so forth with the state. However, she sees this as a tool that she would use and would appreciate. So, Incident Commander Tremblay has joined us as well. So, Councilman Baylor?
All right, so the statement from Dr. Sanders helped. That was one of my questions. One of my concerns is the fact this isn't FDA approved, and why the state gives me kind of a little bit of pause. It seems like if this was a good panacea, the state would have been calling all these communities, say, get in on this order and we'll do this testing. So that gives me a little bit of pause. I'm not a doctor or anything, but I'm just a little bit concerned about that. There's also Abbott Labs is coming out with a test that takes 15 minutes to get results and doesn't require all of the blood draw or anything like that. They will be rolling those out. I'm sure those are going to be hard to get, but I don't know if we've looked at the possibility of getting a couple of those in the state. And there's also self-test kits that are coming out where you don't have to have all the PPE, where the person can actually do the swabbing themselves, which takes a lot of other issues out. So those are my concerns, and if this was such a great deal, I just, watching the news, you would think New York, Chicago, Detroit would be ordering loans of these things, but they're not. So I'm a little bit cautious about whether this thing actually works the way it's advertised. Thanks.
Yes, and I would say that's a good concern, and the medical community has been, there are a lot of vendors that are rushing to market, and the FDA just approved an antibody test manufactured here in the U.S. this morning, and again, that's available Monday. Again, that comes with, that has its own issues, right? Who has even used it yet? What's their delivery times? What's the efficacy? Do they even have the control groups showing the, selectivity or the sensitivity? One of the things that we can do is follow-up diligence too, is to check and see how many orders. The sense I get from the sales rep was that they have orders coming in from around the country. He said he was processing an order in Colorado I know the state ordered some, so I don't know what the levels of use are right now. And for those online, bear with us. We have to put the council on hold to take a call-in number, so please just remain holding. And if we don't answer your question through this discussion here, we will open up. And I also want to mention that our new finance manager, Ken, is available online to advise council on the potential, funding or payment for this. So,
Mr. Mayor,
yes, Kathy.
I have a couple of questions. My first question was going to be who recommended or brought this forward to your attention, our attention, and you've already answered that. I understand that Dr. Sanders sees it as another tool in the toolbox. I've been reading a lot about it, and I understand what it's doing, and I'd actually would love to have the test, but I think it's going to be confusing to the general public. I think if we move forward, it would be taking a lot of explanation to everyone on exactly what it's testing for and what it's going to show. I'm just wondering if I agree with Mr. Baylor that it seems to me the state should be assisting in this more so for especially many of our outlying communities that are going to be affected by commercial fishing soon. But it just seems like a major outlay of cash for our community, and I'm wondering if there aren't more important things that we should be trying to obtain for our community, like PPE or other tests or a ventilator. I'm just wondering about that.
So I'll try to answer this in a couple of pieces. This is not an either or, and it's not the priority. We have other priorities, including the hospital has been for quite some time and is purchasing and contingencies and ordering. And we've been taking community inventories. I can say for my own part, even Cordova Electric has an inventory for existence of N95 masks, Tyvek suits, rubber gloves, so forth. So there's a tremendous amount of planning and work in progress. This is not the overall priority. And unfortunately, this is what it is. We have incomplete information. We have an opportunity in front of us. This is how a nationwide global crisis plays out. There's going to be people competing for resources. There's going to be mistakes or things made along the way. When something starts to gain traction, the demand is going to spike for it because all across the country, people are reading the article that came out in ADN last night saying these antibody tests are something we should be doing. The article 2 days ago in The Economist that says antibody tests are something we should be doing. So we're not the only one contemplating situations like this. And just for the record, it was our former Lieutenant Governor Meade Treadwell, who doesn't have a financial interest in this or affiliated with any of the companies in the food chain here. He just reached out to the community, understanding that our fishery is one of the first in the state. We're kind of the point of the spear for that industry. And it's one tool that he, through his affiliates, has access to and made us aware of. He had already been working with and continuing to work with the state to consider these. And ultimately, the state did decide to purchase these. It's one of the reasons that I'm bringing it to council. But what you said is absolutely valid. It's something that we can, should, might, perhaps can get from the state. I don't know, at this time.
Thank you.
Hi, Clay. I've got another question.
Yes, Councilman Schaefer.
So you said in terms of paying for it, you said that we do have some federal funding coming our way?
Yes,
or state funding, am I mistaken?
Yes, so per the Federal CARES Act, the $2 trillion, package, some stimulus, some response, the city of Cordova will get a COVID-19 response allocation. The schools will get an allocation. The hospital will get an allocation specifically to address COVID-related costs that you wouldn't otherwise have. The federal government hopes to have those portals and application sites and websites active by next week. They are allowing communities to request a 45% advance on those. And so that's where it's at. But I can tell you, they also disseminate and work with the best available information. And I've been getting calls about people trying to file unemployment claims. Well, the volume doubled, national volume doubled from 3 million to 6 million people in 1 week. So yeah, their websites and everything are jammed up. So anyway.
Do you have any estimate of how much will be coming into the community or to the city of Cordova?
I wish I had time to go back and review. I think we have enough information to kind of back calculate. If I recall right, it works out to, it's going to be a per capita basis. So 375 million people in the country divided into the $250 billion or whatever it is. That goes to the state and then out to the communities. But I do not have that number in front of me.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Baylor.
have we reached out, Representative Stutes, to see what other communities in our district are doing? I mean, we're all kind of in the same boat as far as commercial fishing. What are they doing, or would they be interested in? We obviously don't need this many tests. Is there any communication with her and see what's going on?
Have not communicated with Representative Stutes, partly because they've been dawn till dusk working the budget until 2 days ago when they went into recess. I did reach out to Valdez. When I say our medical director, Hannah Sanders, and I reached out to Mayor O'Neill in Valdez and their medical director, and we shared the information, and both our medical director and theirs said, no, there's too many people trying to run to the market with unproven products. We have other priorities right now. We've since changed our perspective a little bit. So has the state. The federal government stockpiling millions of these tests. So there's kind of a change in thought process. And I know Dutch Harbor is implementing a testing program. And that's about as much as, but I don't know if they're even using the antibody programs. I will say other steps would include, and if I had a magic wand and could have done another 24 hours of footwork before this meeting, we would have talked to AML, looked at the other communities in general, not just the fishing communities. They would be a potential outlet, and then again the state and regions.
This is Helen. I just had a question. Does anyone know what it costs for the full-blown COVID test per unit?
No.
I know, I will say, because I have the information in my head, if you take the $5 test kit, the physical test, and you run it through Medicare, Medicaid, through a medical system like CCMC, you end up with a $130 or $140 test. If you were to walk through the door and order a test like this from CCMC, you'd pay $140 for it. However, in discussions with Hannah, the CCMC and/or city can choose to make those available, at a cost, whether it's $5 or $10 or whatever, or Elanca could administer them at a cost or no cost. So.
This is Melina. Most of the questions that I had have been answered, but another question I had was, is there any way that we can require this test to be administered to people coming in? Are we capable of having people run these tests, say, out at the airport or at the ferry terminal, along with other screenings?
Just a second. Helen and I spent a little time with Holly, and she did answer the questions. Let me see if I can pull it up here on my laptop. I don't recall right off if we can require that people take them. I don't think so.
No.
However, we can offer them, and if they do elect to take the test, then we can stipulate, and we would tell them this up front, of course, say, we're offering this test, but if you take it and you indicate positive, we are going to require that you self-quarantine or that you take a PSA test, the other test, or blah, blah, blah. So we can do that. And basically they're agreeing as part of the test to do that. So that maybe answers part of your question. I don't know if it answers all of it.
Yes, that answers it. Like I said, most of my questions have kind of been answered, and I don't, it's hard because I don't think that there is a perfect test out there, and if we just keep waiting for something perfect to come along, they're going to prioritize something like that in a current hotspot already. And here in Cordova, we're facing something very different. We have a critical industry with a flux of people coming in, and we are the first salmon fishery to be starting up in the state. So, I do see this as a tool in our toolbox. It's unfortunate that as communities we have to go out and access this stuff on our own because 50,000 is just more than we need. It would be nice if maybe we could get a couple other communities, maybe specifically the fishing communities that are facing the same questions and uncertainty that we are now, maybe that they can purchase some of these tests from us. I think it's going to be really important for us to get the message out, and I think they can do that while they're administering that this is not a 100% test. If it comes back negative, still pretend like you are a carrier and do everything you can to protect yourself and other people around you. And I think that message can be stated while they're getting the test. And I think it could be a good tool for tracking. If we test people once and then test them again, maybe we can see how the data, have some more data, have some data for the state, for ourselves, for the country. I think it would be, it could be a useful tool. It's hard because it's so expensive and so many units, but I think we need to do something.
Yeah, and maybe I'll summarize and kind of summarize and boil this down because we are processing a fair amount of information. And I'll also say, Councilman Meyer, I'm cognizant of your question regarding correspondence between Hannah and I will speak to that before the meeting's over. There was an internal letter that was circulated and has been leaked out into the community and is flying around in social media. And I will speak to that before we wrap up here. And so again, I understand the community is, afraid and frustrated, and so frankly, are we all. However, we are in an organized planning effort, and I don't want the council to feel undue pressure from me or staff. You do have your city manager here that's participated in part of this and is actually the acting emergency manager, and we also have our incident commander here. Again, based on the information I've seen, I would recommend going forward with this because I have a fairly high level of confidence that we would be able to sell the additional units or partner, and we may even try to do some quick footwork to put those in place beforehand. It gives me more confidence to see that others are, including the state, are purchasing them. I wish I had more confidence in the state coming through with something. But given the nature of where we're at right now, I just don't. And And I feel like this is something that, again, it's not a silver bullet. We have to understand what it is and what it isn't. But it is another tool. And the more tools we can put in place, mitigative measures, minimizing the threats, putting plans in place, and managing the threats that we do face as a community that could have a transient population swell here pretty quickly, that it's another tool in the kit. So,
Clay?
yes.
Clay, it's Dave. I just wanted to clarify. I wanted to get some clarification on something. You said that the doctors at CCMC and NBE, they want these tests, right?
So NBE has not had time to review them. I have a meeting with NBE a little later today, and so because of the meeting here, I wanted to. So I did reach out to them. I got a somewhat positive indication, but they're not familiar with the tests and they haven't assessed them. Dr. Sanders. Couple of concerns. One, just that everybody understands that it's not a diagnostic tool. It's a tool that can be used in conjunction with other tools, and that it's not the priority. But it is a tool that she would welcome and use if it were available.
Okay, I guess for me, I would love to have them tell us they want them before we buy all these tests. If I could get that, with our incident commander saying he wants them, and if we could get the doctors on board to say that they want them and they're going to use them, then I don't have a problem doing this. I'm not a doctor. I don't know diddly squat about this kind of stuff, so I'm going to rely on their expertise. But without that, I have a hard time saying yes.
I'm gonna turn this over to Helen to get her perspective, and then we do have Paul Tremblay, your incident commander, here as well. And I'm going to get logged back in to my city emails here, so I can give you so I can kind of give you verbatim what Hannah said, and also the answer from Holly on whether we can require these tests.
I will admit that this is all new information for all of us, including me, and I'm still digesting. I'm one of those people that likes to know what I'm getting into fully, and I'm not there. That said, two things. I want Ken, our new finance director, to speak to this, because after I got off the phone with Clay and he shared with you what he was thinking, one of the first things I thought about is, do we have the ability to wire $250,000 cash this afternoon somewhere? So I've asked Ken to look into that and to talk to all of you about our fiscal situation, where we are, and what we need to be anticipating over the next few months. So he will speak to you in just a moment about that. The second thing is that I would like to buy us a little bit of time. I know that the virus doesn't give us time. That isn't something that we can say stop for a minute while we figure out what we're doing. So there might be other things that we could purchase with that $250,000 that might provide additional opportunities, diagnostic opportunities for the hospital, the clinics here. I don't know. And so as Clay said, this is a tool that can be used. It isn't the yes, you have COVID, no, you don't have COVID test. But it does give information to folks. The question is how are we going to use that information? How do we identify people who need to be watched and not watched? And I think there's a lot of systems concerns at the moment that I have is how do we make use of this data? How do we follow up? How do we do massive testing? And those are just the unknown questions. I know they've been discussed, can be discussed, they can be resolved, but I just know we aren't there quite yet. So with that, Ken, would you like to speak to our finances? I gave him a very short deadline. We haven't even chatted. I said, be prepared for a new meeting. So if the council's willing, I'll give him the opportunity to share with you that information so that that can help with your decision.
Sure. Thanks, Helen. Now, can you hear me?
Yes.
Because I want to first mention I've been dropping off a lot. So if I do, I apologize. You know, on this call, I've got 12 times already. So with that,
I think
sorry?
Go ahead.
you are dropping on and off or bouncing in and out. Just keep talking.
Okay. So we do money in the bank to pay $250,000. We can do that. So that isn't that a gun to the head. We can do it with revenues that are, you know, the anticipated shortness or not shortfalls coming through. It may get, you know, tight, or it will get tight. The other, so there's that, and I think I may be wrong, but in the conversation in the meeting today with AML, CARES is going to the state and to municipalities over 500,000. So money from CARES isn't guaranteed to us. I think that that will be for the largest of the state for us to get those funds. My other thing, I was thinking there may be a possibility that that the government may say you can't get reimbursed for non-FDA approved drugs. But those were some of my thought in the half hour or hour that this was presented.
We heard you.
Am I there?
I think people are digesting information.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Okay, Helen,
Yes?
this is Tom Baylor. So, to me, I don't know what the rest of the council is thinking. To me, the money's not the overriding issue here. If this is what we need, we'll come up with the money. I have more concerns that it's not an FDA-approved product. The concerns that the state isn't a whole hog on this. The concerns that we haven't reached out to other communities, whether by telephone or email, saying, what are you doing? If this was such a great quote-unquote tool, you would think that they would be all on board too. And I'd also have concern. I would rather hear directly from the doctors that we have in Alanka also. I mean, we're actually trying to negotiate the sale to them. I think they should have an input on this. And none of us here on council can make this decision as far as the medical part of this. But if the doctor sits up there and says, you know what, I absolutely recommend this, I absolutely need this, then I'm ready to spend the money tomorrow. But until I hear that from a doctor, until I get information from other communities, what they're doing, I'd have a hard time supporting this at this point. Thank you.
Well, I have a question.
Yes, Councilman Schaefer.
So you mentioned a couple of times that Hannah Sanders, her comment was that these are tools, they weren't the priority for the hospital, what they'd spend their resources on. What is the priority? Or what, you know, like, is there something else to which we could direct funds like this?
Yeah. So let me speak to testing first, and then this may be a good segue into discussion about her letter to me and kind of her overall characterization of the threat and kind of a worst case scenario that she presented there. And so, and I have her email open here. So the major part of the issue, and I'm reading almost verbatim from her email, a major part of the issue, yes, this is a major part of the issue. We want testing. We want to know who's been infected. The most infective part of the illness is during viral shedding, often the very first week of illness. These tests are negative during that period. So any antibody test is not going to help us conserve resources in Cordova, because by the time the patient has seroconversion, their course has most often already been decided. The test will not help her triage or treat patients in Cordova. So she's hesitant to recommend it as a screen for people coming in, because essentially they might let their guard down, and it's not going to tell, with any certainty whether or not they're infected and or contagious. And then a false negative could let them think, oh wow, I'm showing negative when they're really not. So that's a risk on the front end. Then on the she says, however, during the quarantine period, there's utility in doing an antibody test, and then you could do the PCR test, which is the test we're doing now, if it's positive. If they're cheap, covered by a grant, or given to us, would I be thrilled to have them? Absolutely. I like the idea of full surveillance in Cordova, even if it's mostly scientific, but wouldn't spend limited hospital resources on the tests that we can't bill for until FDA emergency use authorization is approved. So city surveillance under an emergency, it's great, and let's get them. There are several companies trying to sell them, and she mentions another one, Biopharma, and this one that we're looking at. She doesn't know there's much of a chance of using more than a couple thousand of them. So maybe shop around and see who can give us the best deal. So that's kind of her arching device or advice. And again, I don't know that we have a bullet to our head, and we have some other paths we can pursue there. So is there any other questions specifically on the testing? And then I think some other input. Well, maybe it's not related directly to an action item here. So I'll just open it up there.
Mr. Mayor, Allison?
Councilman Allison.
Yeah, I guess my comments right now are number one, I don't support this today. We've heard from both the mayor and the manager that they just haven't had time to digest this much. The finance director, the same thing, hasn't had time to digest this much. But my main concern, I guess, is that this test isn't changing our course of action at all. We're still doing the quarantine. It doesn't tell us anything except if somebody has had it before, which they've had it before they were contagious. It just doesn't change our treatment protocol at all. So if there's other priorities, I think we need to go towards those. This, everybody knows that this whole situation changes 3 times a day, and new tests are coming out, and I do agree that we need to have something that's at least emergency approved by the FDA before we do something like that. But anyway, my concern is that this test doesn't do anything for us. Yeah, it's nice to have a capillary in your toolbox, but you use that screwdriver every day. But it's nice to have it if you could have it like Dr. Sanders said. But if you got to spend your own resources on it, she's not willing to do that, and I don't think at this time I'm willing to do that either. If we look at this over the next few days and some other communities that want to join in with us, and it turns out that all the research everybody does is for us, then my mind could be changed. But at this point in time, I just can't support a test that doesn't do anything for us when we're spending $250,000 on it.
Okay. Other council comments?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, this is Megan.
Councilman Meyer, I heard, and then another one, but Councilman Meyer?
Yeah, I guess I just want to make it a little clear too, because it sounds like as council we might kind of all be on similar pages here. I do if you're looking for support of buying all this today and wiring the money today, I don't know that I wouldn't be supportive of it, but I do think it's something that we should be looking at very closely for the next couple days and seeing if other communities want to join us in the purchasing. And I would just, one suggestion would be if Valdez or communities in our immediate area aren't interested in this time, maybe other fishing communities would be interested, because if we can get a handful on board, maybe we can make this tool as another tool in the toolbox. It's not a positive test, it's not a, cure-all, but I do think that we should be looking for tools to add to our toolbox. But I think as the community our size, buying 50,000 of them for $250,000 isn't realistic for us right now. I think we need to get other partners included, and I think that can be done in the next few days.
Okay, and then we had another councilman I didn't quite catch.
Would have been good.
Yeah, this is Jeff.
Councilman Guard.
Yeah, my fear in waiting for this, I've been looking at this quite a little bit too in the last couple of days, and this, I do see this as doing something for us. You get the two different points you're going to get recorded on this test for COVID-19, one for the M's and one for the G's. My understanding, when you're test M positive, you're still an active carrier of it, and you can transmit it to others. It sounds questionable whether there's any transmission during the M period or the G period, the later phase of it. But it can tell you who's positive, who's negative, or who may be positive, who may be negative. I've got questions about whether or not we can require it or not. That's something I'm interested in. It would seem that if it's a public safety, public health issue, it could be required. But not being a constitutional lawyer, I can't say anything like that for sure. But none of this that we're going to find is going to be the silver bullet or the smoking gun that's going to cure all our problems. I see this as being something that we may be able to take care of a portion of the vector of transmission throughout the community out. So we take out part of that. We find something else next week that you can take out another section of the vector for transmission through the community. I think we need a many-layered approach to this. 250,000 is chump change, but basically it's one trash truck. And I want any of you to tell me which one of your neighbors, friends, or family here in Cordova is not worth a trash truck. So those are my thoughts on this. I don't think I've done all the research I'd feel comfortable with on this, but I see windows of opportunity closing to get this, or stretching out where our time frame to getting them is not going to be until much later down the road because of volumes of orders that are going to be going in. The president just got the first one of these tests yesterday or the day before in the news, and it's just everything that picks up traction, hydroxychloroquine or the chloroquine stuff, that's already getting really hard to access. It's everything that comes up that can buy you a little bit of vector clearance in this stuff is just getting sucked up because of the volume of need. So I don't know that I am opposed at all to doing this purchase. And if we could mandatorily require the use of these, I could easily see burning up 25,000 of these tests in Cordova.
Okay, I think we're converging here. And Helen?
I just wanted to say that to answer your question, we've been given advice that we would not be allowed to require the exam, the test. And the other thing is, there is a lot of information coming and going. I just read an article this morning, just trying to catch up on things, that the UK had stockpiled a bunch of these tests, and they were not confident that they were getting accurate results, and yesterday decided they weren't going to use them. So it goes both ways. And I think ultimately, as a community, we have to decide what the appropriate and most cost-effective tool. I don't think this is a matter of us saying no life is worth it. It's really about making sure that we're testing in such a way that or utilizing our resources in such a way that it has maximum benefit for the community. And this is one option. And I would love the opportunity to spend the weekend looking at some other ones if there were such things. And I know Clay has spent a lot of time on this one, and I think it's something, if you guys aren't able to decide today to proceed, that this won't be the last you hear from us about other options that are available for us to deploy in the community to make sure that we keep this place safe.
Thank you, Helen. And that's a perfect segue, I think. We're in an action item. I think the council has converged around not right now and not without more information. And frankly, the one piece that I'd hoped to bring from the manufacturer was a cancellation window. And frankly, in my experience, if there's a big enough demand for something, a manufacturer doesn't have any problem saying, go ahead and place your order. And today, of course, you don't usually wire money ahead when you do that, and we'll cancel your order in such and such time frame. And I like to have that in writing. And we didn't get that in time, and that's fine. But I think there was and is a lot of value in having an emergency meeting today. I really appreciate council's high level of participation. We know that you're getting hammered with questions and suggestions, and at times, unfortunately, threats and insults if you're getting the same communications we are. And this is another opportunity, as you expressed, to improve the transparency and communications to the community, the planning that we are doing and are considering. And so I think it's good to wrap up this action item and take it to a vote. And then I just want to share another item on communications in general from our attorney. So is there further discussion?
Mr. Mayor?
Make one more comment.
Yes, please, Councilman Meyer.
Oh, and then Ann, I think she was saying something afterwards, but maybe Ann can do it separate or ask her question first, but I was going to suggest maybe we table it rather than vote yes or no today.
Okay. Does that need a second, Susan?
I'd second it.
We need to table to a time certain.
Well,
What are they, do you want to postpone it?
So
Staff.
table it is to be taken up before the end of the meeting. You could postpone to a time certain, which may be the special meeting
Refer to staff.
noon Wednesday, or refer to staff and bring it back.
Another
I think we
meeting.
can do our refer to staff because if something needs to come up, then maybe we can do a special meeting for it, or it can go on our Wednesday meeting. That might be a little bit too far, but I think we all had a lot of questions and voiced what we need to, so staff can look into that more.
Sure. Okay. And I had a meeting with NVE at 1 o'clock, and I think I see Bert just is watching along, so he realizes I'm running late. But is that Councilman Gard? I think you were the second, so that's all right to refer to staff?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And yes, we have some more footwork to do, and we'll pursue some of the options that we laid out. So further discussion? Councilman Schaefer, did you have discussion?
yeah, actually, when it does come before us again, if they have efficacy rates available for these tests, I think that kind of information would be helpful as well.
Sure. In fact, we can circulate some of that. There's some fairly detailed information on this particular technology, on the sensitivity and the selectivity.
Yeah, just in terms of like what the false positives and false negative rates are, and how reliable they are.
Yeah.
That'd be helpful. Thanks.
Okay, further discussion on referring to staff? All those in favor? Roll call, please.
Let me do it as a roll call. David Gleason,
Yes.
Kathy Sherman,
Yes.
Melina Meyer,
Yes.
Ann Schaefer,
Yes.
David Allison,
Yes.
Tom Baylor,
Yes.
and Jeff Guard.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0.
Okay, thank you, Council. So the other item was Hannah Sanders, of course, is she's our medical director, and the incident management team, of which I'm a part, Helen's a part, many city staff are a part in a separate role of emergency management than their normal duties. So Hannah sent me an internal communication characterizing, and again, something that said 3 days ago is very much a snapshot. Things are moving very quickly, and the context of her comprehensive and fairly dire outlook was in the context of a worst case scenario and potentially bad scenario, outside of the context of other emails that we exchanged and mitigative measures that that we're putting in place, that processors, fishermen, the state and federal government are putting in place, and rapidly changing landscape in terms of restrictions. I can't honestly look someone in the face and say that there's a 100% chance we are or aren't going to have a fishery this year, or that we won't be in or out of martial law, et cetera. So our guidance from our council is that in the context of an internal email from the medical director to mayor acting as an incident manager is a somewhat privileged and protected communication. So it has legal protection, it has its own context, and it's a decision-making communication. It's a basis for formulating decisions. So so there's a balance between being transparent and sharing information as it becomes available. And we have an extended team, the medical staff, extended medical staff, and the incident management team. And that was shared amongst that team to operationalize and recommend and consider and vet that information. And that was leaked outside of that group. So we identified that break and have worked across the teams to emphasize what is and isn't shared and the manners in which it is supposed to be shared through public information officers. So we've taken some correction there, but that communication did go out to the community, and I don't want to make that exact communication available to the council, and I should say the medical director has recommended that not be provided to the council and the community as a correspondence from her to them, and or from us to them, because that's not the way we communicate. And so she is preparing, as of yesterday when we recognize this, she is preparing an updated and accurate and packaged communication with council that I think will help answer some of your and the community's questions about, like you asked earlier, what are those priorities? What are the hangups? What are the gaps? And what are we doing to manage them? What can we do to manage them? And so we've had other communications. You'll hear another airing this afternoon of Q&A that Heather Brand and myself and Hannah participated with the radio station right before I came over here, working off of our question and answer list that we're answering to the community from our Cordova Prepared page, and we'll be posting. And you'll hear on there, for example, that the state's requiring people to fill out travel forms, but one of the gaps we've identified is somebody that goes through Juneau doesn't necessarily submit their survey in Juneau. that's something we want to know, and frankly, we want a copy of it. So we're working with the state to get that. If we don't or can't get that, we have our own protocols that we're putting in place anyway. So these are just one little tiny element of one little part of this that the incident management team is managing on a hourly basis. So is there any questions about communications? So to be clear, I'm not going to share that email to council. If you want to schedule an executive session to discuss that, we can, or we can pull Holly in. We can ultimately release that information after our temporary management assessment and decision-making and recommendations to the council play out. But meanwhile, again, that information's changing. We will have you basically that core information, but delivered from Hannah to council deliberately and with, with the process that we're supposed to follow.
Yeah, Clay?
Yes, Councilman Gleason.
Yeah, so that was just clarifying, that was personal correspondence to you, not a letter to the city is what you're saying, right?
It was addressed to the mayor, but it was operational information that was provided to the incident management team, and it was shared with the incident management team and with medical staff to identify, her largest concern, which is frankly the priority that we're managing right now and working with the state management. In fact, I've gotten several emails and texts just during the course of this from the state emergency management office and our emergency management coordinator.
Okay, thanks.
So yes, it's not official city correspondence.
Yeah, I think that was the important point right there.
Yeah.
If I may, Clay,
Councilman Baylor.
I think another important thing to pick up on that is you're not the only one looking at this. This is getting shared with other professionals, and then those decisions are, in other words, you don't have the power to hide something. It's being shared with other people, and right decisions are being made. So I just want to clarify that.
Yes, that's exactly right. So it's kind of like if I'm talking to Paul and say, the incident commander and say, we need 2 hours ago, I said, I think we need to do this based on the information I gave him. He said, we need to do this. We've got new information just since then. So that's kind of the landscape. And if someone heard our conversation 2 hours ago and takes it out to the streets of Cordova, we might tell them something completely different if they ask us 2 hours later. So that's the way it is. And and it's not just me saying I don't want to share this. It's a medical director that wrote it that said this isn't the appropriate time and place, and unfortunately not even the appropriate information to be distributing right now. So and it's important for us to be in council and the incident management team. We all recognize the importance of being transparent and doing a better job of communicating, and that's part of what we're doing right here. So I do want to mention before we go to audience participation and council comments, we are going to go to the phone lines, and then so that we can put council on hold and switch to audience comments. So I'll give you a 2-minute warning now, because I know there's a lag on YouTube, to call 253-6202, and we can take audience participation from the phone. And while we're waiting for the call to come in, we can start going through council comments. Councilman Gleason.
Hey, Clay, can I ask a question real quick?
Oh, I apologize. Yes, Councilman Schaefer.
So we'll get put on hold for the audience comments. Will we be able to hear them?
Just to pick up the first call, you'll get put on hold just for a second to pick up the first call. Then we'll join you in.
Okay, did you hear that, Councilman Schaefer?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah, thank you.
Good question. Okay, so while we're waiting for any calls that might come in, Councilman Gleason?
Just a council comment. I just want the public to know that we take this seriously, and we're doing the best we can with the information that we have, and we care about Cordova. We don't want anybody to get sick. We don't want anything to come in here. And I just recommend that people follow all the protocols we have. And we're going to get through this.
Thank you. Councilman Baylor?
Yeah, I'd echo that. And just a couple things I saw Petersburg was doing is they're actually going to station a couple people at their airport with those forms the state's providing and get them filled out and get them turned in. That might be a good use of our resource. They're also recommending, I think the community's kind of getting together on this as far as the post office goes. Like maybe you go get the odd numbers, go get it 3 days a week or 2 days a week, and the even numbers go another day. So maybe the command center, maybe they could get that out there. Maybe we could work that so you got less congestion in the post office. And I want to thank Helen for comment there clarifying. Of course, nobody is judging money over life. We're just trying to make the best decisions. And I think her response was well put. Thanks for all your hard work.
Okay, and we have a call coming in, so we'll go ahead and switch to call. Yes, audience comment.
Hello, this is Zachary Smith from the Cordova Times. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I just wanted to make sure I had this straight. So this hypothetical order of, was it 50,000 units of testing materials?
Yes.
Now, is that 50,000 kits?
Yes, it'd be 50,000 individual tests.
Oh, so enough material to perform 50,000 tests.
Yes.
All right, that's all I had. Thank you.
Okay, you bet.
All right.
There's another one.
Okay, we have another call coming in. Audience comments.
Command center, maybe they could get that out there. Maybe work that so you got less congestion in the post office.
We don't have volume. You're not coming in very clearly at all.
Can you hear me?
We can now.
Okay, I'm still on lag on YouTube.
Mute the YouTube.
Mute the YouTube, please.
Just a minute, I'm trying. Okay, this is Luke Bohr. I just had a couple of things. Can you have a city person watch YouTube? I watched a whole bunch of people drop off when it went silent, and I happened to stay watching, and then it came back on later, but it took a long, long time before all those people come back on, so you'd have somebody from the city watch it and then stop the meeting because of the Public Meetings Act so that you do stuff so that we, the public, can see what's going on. The other thing I have is a comment on your test discussion. Is are PPEs, different PPEs required for each person tested? So if you use 25,000 tests, you need 25,000 sets of PPEs. That's just a statement/question. I had another concern about a statement by the mayor. You had three different results on the testing. You said if this one happens, then we'll be, quote, quarantining for sure. So are we quarantining not for sure at other times? And then you said that in that letter that the public isn't supposed to have, that it was a worst case scenario, and that letter actually said that it was the best case scenario. And nothing was on Cordova Prepared's Facebook page announcing this meeting at all, and I just wonder why that is. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I guess just to clarify, quarantining for sure, I guess a more accurate way to characterize that is someone who isn't in a quarantine, for example, a follow-up test or a test, voluntary test, and they test positive, that would put them into quarantine. At the beginning of the meeting, and we will look into the technical issues. Your feedback helps us with the audio and other challenges, and it's a work in progress. But That's how we can make corrections. So this meeting is an emergency meeting, and because of the time-sensitive nature, if we wanted to place an order and if we wanted to get into the queue on this particular one, then the timing was of essence. And again, additional information that I'd hoped would come in before the meeting didn't. So that's why we scheduled it on fairly short notice without our normal public notification, and why it is called an emergency meeting. But YouTube and the ability to record it and post it is our way of making sure that the public has access to it. So that we're not trying to hide anything, in fact, just the opposite. Do we have another call in line? Okay. Can you, if you're done, caller, could you hang up and that frees the line back up?
All right, I'll hang up.
Okay, thank you. I'll go back to councilman comments while we're waiting, and Councilman Sherman.
I just have a few things. I was going to thank you for the meeting. I think it was of an emergency nature, and I'm glad you brought this forward to us. I really wanted to compliment the emergency management team for all their efforts in trying to get information out. I think the radio shows are making a big difference in the community. And again, I think I'm going to echo Councilman Glasson's comments that we are trying to make the best decisions. And it's a moving target, and we all know that. And I think the more that we work together and be patient and stay safe amongst ourselves, the better it'll turn out. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Gard?
Yes, hello. Yeah, I'd like to echo all the comments on thanks to staff and the emergency management team, and I'd like to clarify that I was in no way, shape, or form when I was talking about value of life, trying to infer that anybody sitting at this table does not value everybody's life in Cordova. It was only to be used contextually. Anyway, thank you for everything that everybody's doing. And if we all keep at this, we'll get through it together. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilman Meyer?
Yeah, I'll just echo the comments said before me, and thank you to the management team and all the effort that's going forward. I realize this is a moving target, and thank you everyone for all the work being put in, and thank you to the public for raising concerns and putting in questions to the management team. It's going to take all of us, so appreciate all the work being done on both fronts. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Meyer. Councilman Schaefer?
Hi, yep, just echo everyone, all the sentiments that have been said already. Big thank you to the management team. I've heard only positive feedback about the daily updates on the radio, so I think that's a really good step forward. And then in addition to the recommendations that Councilman Baylor was suggesting, I was also reading recently that I think on St. Paul Island, they're encouraging each family to designate a single person to do the errands, just to sort of minimize how many people are going into the grocery stores and the post office and things like that. So that's something that people could think about with their own families. And yeah, so thanks everyone. That's it.
Thank you, Councilman Schaefer. And Councilman Ellison?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, for all your efforts there, and the management team. Some of those are being paid minimally, certainly not for the disaster pay that you deserve, but others are volunteering, such as yourself, and appreciate the efforts that you're putting in there. I would echo what has been said too before me, and add that we can't control everybody else in the world, but we can certainly control ourselves and protect ourselves and be smart about things. And and if everybody takes care of themselves, then we all end up taking care of each other. So appreciate the efforts everybody's been putting in, and stay safe.
Thank you, Councilman Allison, and that is the perfect way to wrap up, as a reminder that the best way to protect yourself is to protect yourself. And again, back to our national leadership, it's behavior that's going to manage a successful path through this. It isn't policies or mandates or government intervention. It's individual behaviors, and then preparation on the city side and emergency management team side to make sure that we're in a position to respond to worst case scenarios. So thank you very much. And with that, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
And with no objection, we're adjourned. Thank you, council.
Yep, bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Yep, and we will be having, again, a press briefing this afternoon, and at 5 o'clock on radio stations, we'll air some Q&A with your medical and management team.
Should we have planned for something for Monday or no?